paragraph without there being a bit of emotion involved in it. What is it that she's saying? She seems to kind of be saying, back in the early days, the music was about bringing people together more than it was about somehow dividing by lines of, you like this, I don't like you because you like this. The next paragraph. That was where we felt free, she says. A single line, right? Looking back on it now, I can see that hip-hop was born of the diversity I found at 141. Unlike the hip-hop of today, it didn't come pre-packaged from marketing department with millions of dollars to spend. Our hip-hop was the product of a bunch of kids from a bunch of different places trying to talk to each other, trying to create a common language that could cut through the many languages people spoke at home. Intuitively, kids were making a community where there was none. We were affirming our sameness in a world that seemed to only emphasize our differences. Look at that line. It's a compelling line. We were affirming our sameness in a world that seemed to only emphasize our difference. That desire to come together, irrespective of superficial differences and sometimes in celebration of them, was what gave hip-hop authenticity. And that was what I kept. And that was what kept it honest. And as crucial to our well-being as food, it's what kept it real. The authenticity, in other words, in the early days. Notice she seems to be suggesting without suggesting it, that hip-hop has become less authentic. Did you notice this? That it's become more about the money. It's become more about the celebrity. It's been more about selling something than it is about enjoying something or unifying in some way. I can't say, let's watch how she finishes this essay. I can't say much about hip-hop today, but I can say that old hip-hop, original hip-hop, changed my life forever. I only lived in the boogie-down Bronx for a year, but those 12 months gave me so much. I learned that art could bring people together and make them forget their differences. I learned, notice the repetition again, how good it could feel to move with a posse, a group of friends who had my back no matter what. I learned that I could express myself and communicate with others through what I wore and how I walked and what music I liked. I learned that it doesn't take money or a special degree to transform the grit and drive and hardness of the city into something beautiful. Wow, what a compelling paragraph. Notice number 30. What is Walker's point of view on the 12 months she spent in the Bronx? Well, some of you will simply say, she learned. And what is it that she learned? That even though we're all different, through art, we all can somehow connect. We can be together. In other words, art, she says, became the new understanding of liberty and freedom and unity coming together. All right, let's finish. 439. Loyalty, community, self-confidence, creativity. Hip-hop taught me more about real life than anything I learned that year in class. Now that is an interesting idea. You'll remember that we make the distinction in our freshman year, the distinction between your schooling and your education. She says, my true education was not in school. My true education was what happened outside of school. Jot down in 3B, is that true for you? Have you found that it's actually the case? You learn more about the world you live in your life outside of school than inside of school. Or maybe we should say it this way, to be fair. Not so much in the classes in school do you learn, but in the halls, with your friends, and sometimes around your enemies, if you have them, right? The exchange of ideas. This is an interesting idea too, because notice how she says, when I dropped into this new school, it was like dropping into a new culture, which does beg a question. As a freshman student at Worland High School, do you drop into a new culture? Or is it fair to say that the high school is exactly the way the middle school is? I hear sometimes freshmen will say this, the high school is exactly as the middle school was. And yet I'm going to challenge you as a freshman to ask this question as you go through the experience. How much watching are you doing in your freshman year? And who are you watching? And you're listening, and you're figuring stuff out. And oh, I'm allowed to do that, but I'm not allowed to say that. All of that is, again, culture contact. It's a culture contact of a different kind. And yet notice how, very regularly, we come into new cultures and we find a point of unity in art, especially in music. That's her view. And she says in the early days, that's what hip-hop was about. Let's finish. I hope when kids today look at shiny videos by their favorite hip-hop artists, they will see through the expensive cars and exotic locations, the women in skimpy outfits, and the men trying to approximate a gangsta lean. I hope they will remember that hip-hop was born without a formula and without a lot of expensive props or violent undertones. I hope they will marvel at the fact that in the early days of hip-hop, Young people were making it up as they went along, following their hearts, following what felt good. I hope they will think about what it takes to create culture that is unique and transcendent and honest. And I hope they begin to dream about creating a new world for themselves. I hope hip-hop inspires them to make their own revolution. Now, a number of years ago, of course, Eminem made his famous 8 Mile. And that film had a similar effect that this essay will have had, because it forced artists who were obviously in the business to look back to the early days when it all started, if you will. Now, of course, there's huge debate about when any art form starts. The point that's being made here in this essay is it never really starts in a single moment. Movements are born out of the soil of the past, and then out of that soil it kind of grows, if you will. All right, well, let's jump to 2A really quickly. What is for you the most important message that you draw out of this? Some students will say the power of the past as it influences the present. Some students will go to that final line and they will say, she writes the entire essay for that final line. It's a challenge. Not completely unlike the challenge of Patrick Henry and Learned Hand. It's a challenge to say, as you go forward, don't forget the past, but don't be tied down by the past, right? You are the new generation. What will you create? You will create something new out of the old. That is inevitably how it works. Finally, some students have said, the key in all of this is the word respect. We have to learn how to respect the past, especially in music. We never want to make fun of those who came before, because they gave to us who and what we are, musically speaking, right? At 2B, man, there's just so much here, isn't there, going on at the rhetorical level. Notice again the repetitions, the language, but I want to point this out with a form of a question for you. Some students have said, I can read this much, much easier than the Patrick Henry speech. Why? Jot down why. Some will say it's word choice. Some will say it's the word order, what we call syntax, the grammar itself, right? Some will say it's the context. I understand this so much better because I understand the music. Do not understand political history and all that other garbage. I would say you don't until you challenge yourself to learn it, right? Some students will say, I listen to music differently and watch musically differently after I've read this essay. I will say the same is true about your study of American history and thought and political thought when you've studied the 2 other models in Model 1, Model 2 of Learned Hand and Patrick Henry. At 3A, okay, so what is for you your favorite text that celebrates musical roots, celebrates where it comes from? Do you have a single song you can write down right now that celebrates the stuff that came before, that fundamentally is kind of teaching you need to respect what came before, because what came before is important to what we have now? Do you have a favorite song or movie that challenges you to go forward, to be something more, to grow beyond the roots that you already have, right? Of course, at 3B, we'll ask several questions as well. Why is it the case that for so many students, you're still listening to the music in your freshman year that you were listening to in your 7th grade year? And why is it that I talk with seniors who are still listening to the same basic artists and music types they were listening to when they were freshmen and sophomores? It's not that you can't have your favorites, but why not learn to grow beyond, outside of? Learn to enjoy. We're not saying necessarily like, but we will say it a lot in freshman English, so here comes a mantra for us. We say this a lot in 303. We're not here to like stuff, we're here to appreciate stuff. That is to say, back to our essay, respect. And you can't respect what you haven't been exposed to and what you don't know. So begin to think about this as freshmen. Begin to grow your horizons, your knowledge base, what you're exposing yourself to. When you get into a car and somebody's playing music you don't like, don't tell them to shut it off. But try to respect it in some way. Try to appreciate it in some way, right? Well, I hope that you've appreciated these 3 models. We now have introduced you to unit number 3. We now are ready to turn in our next series of comments to the actual non-fiction essays that we will be looking at. And I hope we can use some of the information we've learned in these model studies to help us. Thank you.